Hello, students, staff, and community members. My name is Scott Krauser, and I'm the Assistant Superintendent of York Suburban School District. Today, I'm joined by Loretta Claiborne, who has graciously agreed to be interviewed as part of our celebration of Black History Month. Ms. Claiborne is a York County native whose list of accomplishments as an advocate, athlete, and speaker are remarkable. For instance, she has competed in 6 Special Olympics, World Games, and medaled in the half marathon, 1 mile run, 5,000 meter run, 3,000 meter run, 1,500 meter run, bowling, and figure skating. She's completed 26 marathons, including the 1981 Boston Marathon, in which she became the first Special Olympics athlete to run the event. She received the 1996 Arthur Ashe Award for Courage. She's been inducted into the Hall of Fame for 5 different organizations, been recognized by Presidents Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, and Ronald Reagan, received 3 honorary doctorate degrees, and much, much more. So, Ms. Claiborne, thank you so much for being with us today. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your journey, beginning with the obstacles you had to overcome as a child?
Sure. Of course, my journey started way before I knew about myself as a young kid, but my journey also, I got to hear about my journey because of my mother telling me stories. And I remember her telling me stories. When I was blind, I was born blind. I didn't walk to the age of 4. Then I was put into school, and then, of course, it made it really tough because you have those marks against you, not because of the color of your skin or being a female, but just being a child, that you had such challenges in front of you. And she knew she had a long way to go, but she was determined. She was a fighter, being a single parent, raising 7 living children. And she says, you know what goes for my other 6 goes for this one too. She fought for me to stay in school. I repeated kindergarten, 1st grade, and 2nd grade. And it was tough because she had started to get the indication from the system that, you know, children like this, even though you're fighting so hard, she needs to be institutionalized. And I remember going to see the first 2 institutions that I was going to go to, Eastern State School and Hospital, which is now closed and demolished, and Lawton State School and Hospital, which was up beyond Penn State, up in the Appalachian Mountains. So it's just one of those things, and she fought for me to graduate. And her big dream was for me to receive my high school diploma, but not only to just receive a diploma, because children like me, if you made it through school, you were very lucky, number 1. And number 2, you got a certificate, or your diploma would say, Loretta Claiborne has attended classes at William Penn Senior High School. She wanted my diploma to make sure that I worked hard enough and earned my diploma, that Loretta Claiborne has, you know, completed her studies at William Penn Senior High School, completed her studies, the same as my sisters and brothers' diploma. And it happened.
Well, wonderful. It sounds like at an early start, the goal setting and advocacy model of your mother has laid a great foundation for you. As I shared, we have many students who submitted questions for you, so I'd like to ask some of them now. And I'll start with a question by 7th grader Colby McKenna, who asks, what is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
The best piece of advice that I've ever received actually really came from my mother. You know, being the best of who you are. It's not how much you have, it's what you have and how you use it. You don't have to have a lot of money for this young person, or you don't have to have a lot of things. But if you have the strength and the courage, then use it. Sometimes you have to go beyond. Don't be afraid to step out of your box. And my mother always said to me, you know, sometimes you have to just step out. She didn't say step out of your box, but I use that term because we all have a little box that we are comfort zones. And I remember her always saying, you know, she had all these things that she said and how I value my life. Look at my life today. I think about those things that I totally ignored as a 7th grader coming up. Being a kid, I know what it's like. You get a little chip on your shoulder, but Mom, you said that 50 million times. And I hope that young man doesn't grow up to be An older person says, man, I wish I would have just listened to my mother.
Right. Great advice.
Being the
Absolutely.
best that you could be, it's not how much you have, it's how you use it. It's what you have and how you use it. Don't forget to step out of your box. Remember when you go out that door, I want you to look your best and never forget it. I come running out the door and we were going to school. We had to walk to school. We lived in the city and it was almost just shy of 2 miles. So we didn't qualify for a bus. And I come running out the door and my mother looked at me and said, where are you going? I said, I got to go to school. I don't want to be late. She says, let me tell you something. You just turn your behind around. You go up and look in that mirror and look at that head. So I went upstairs. I brushed my hair back. I fixed my ponytail. When I went out the door, she said, let me tell you something. You might think I'm being hard on you, and I am, but it's only for you to survive and to be your best. I want you to look your best. And then when you look your best, you can be your best, and then you can feel your best. And she would always say to me, walking out the door, look your best, feel your best, be your best. Because if you walk out the door and you don't look good, you're not going to feel good. And for your 7th and 6th graders, I know how it is for young teenagers. They're not going through no more different than I did. And they are going through the same problems. It might be with the internet or something like that, but they're still going through the challenges of being a kid, of coming from the 6th and 5th grade to being that 7th, 8th, and 9th grader. You're going through some things. So when you walk out your door, you want to look your best, you want to feel your best, then you can be your best.
Great, thank you. Yeah, agreed. Those middle years are difficult, so we appreciate
and
it.
you're dealing with it at your school level.
Good. Well, let me share another one then from a 6th grader, Eva Wang, who wonders, did you ever want to give up? And if so, what kept you going?
You know, I'm going to be upfront and honest. There was many a time I wanted to give up. But my mom, being the mom she was, she gave no room for that. It was like, I never forget when I started Special Olympics. It was a counselor at a shelter workshop that I worked at. I was going to school a week and going to the workshop a week. And I joined Special Olympics. And then finally I said, coming home, we don't got this kind of money. I know what my mom's going to say, thinking to myself, I couldn't voice it. I know what Rita's going to say. She ain't got no money for that. She's on welfare. She's got 6 children. She got 3 in drum corps. So I knew the answer before I got home. So she looked at the paper and she was sitting there playing cards and she says, you know what? I don't have money for this. And then her neighbor read it. The lady she was playing cards with said, Rita, look at this. This might do Loretta some good. So the first day of practice, I thought maybe, like everything else, landed on top of the refrigerator. I ain't got to worry about that. That Saturday came, my mom banged on the wall, Loretta, get up, get up. But it's 6 o'clock in the morning, it's fine. I don't give good few choice words. You get down to my house and you're going to that program. Sign up for something else and take a free sandwich. I was mad. I was ready to get up. And it was lightning. It was January 1970. I wanted to give up on graduating from high school too, but my mom, she was one of those things. You start quitting now, you'll always be quitting. I knew the words. I could say them under my breath in front of her. I went to the practice and came home. She says, how was your practice? I said, it was okay. She said, well, I'm going to tell you something. You get up there and you do them bathrooms and you get down and you got your clothes hang out. You get them clothes hang out, get your housework done. I said, well, I quit Special Olympics. She said, what did you say? I said, I quit. She says, not in Loretta Claiborne's house, you don't quit. What did I tell you? What did I tell you about that? What did I tell your sister the other week about that dance that she wanted to go to that she bugged me? You start quitting now, you'll always be quitting. So it's natural to want to give up. It's natural to be that 6th, 7th, and 8th grader, and that's a time when they want to give up. Young people, hang on in there. Don't give up. Because if you give up now, you're always giving up. You never want to meet the hard challenge, and life is about challenges.
Yeah, great. Again, great advice. Thank you. So a sophomore from the York Suburban High School, Jesse Ehrlich, submitted this question. You participate in many sports, including running, figure skating, soccer, skiing, golf, basketball, softball, swimming, tennis, and bowling. How do you manage your time to be able to participate in all these different activities?
You know, when I was very young, when I was that 10th grader, I didn't have much to do because people like me with intellectual disability weren't invited to the dances, weren't invited to everything. And I know at York Suburban and schools now we have come so far, so students are being invited to things. But when I started Special Olympics, my mom always made me, even as a young child, she said, you better figure out your time. It's called time management. And how I managed that time, I also did martial arts. Martial arts for 28 years. I started martial arts in 1971. I started Special Olympics in 1970. And I remember one day I was doing some housework and we just look at me, my mother would look at me and says, I don't see how you do all these things that you do. But I learned how to manage my time. I knew on Monday, Wednesdays, and Friday nights, I had martial arts, but I had schoolwork to get done. I was still in school. I had housework to get done. So I had to manage my time from Monday, Wednesday, and Friday nights because I had to be in martial arts in order to compete in competition. So then I had the Special Olympics on Saturdays. And then Special Olympics had only one or two sports. So I picked my main sport that I wanted to do at that time was running. So I had to manage out my day. Even every day to train for running, I was going to school. Schoolwork came first. If I had an issue with schoolwork, I had to get that done. Housework came second. So I had to manage my time. And one of the hard things for children today is to manage their time because a lot of our children, it's not like when I grew up, there wasn't sports for girls in school. So sports wasn't valued, but I know a lot of children, and I know when I grew up, York Suburban was #1 swimming team. Nobody could beat York Suburban. So those children, those students had to train at night. So they had to learn how to manage their time. And I learned how to manage my time through sport. And I know for a lot of your students, they like to be on the computer, they like to be on the phone. I hope they use time management so it's easier for them. Okay, tonight, I know I got homework, get done. I know I had this to get done. I know I'm preparing for a test. I'm gonna have that half an hour. So you manage that time that you can get done. And that's very important. I'm staying with family now, and a young man swims. He's leaving in the half an hour to go to swimming practice, even though school's closed. Today he was on a computer managing his time because he knows that next year when he graduates from high school, it's college.
Yeah.
So time management to young people in 6th, 7th, 8th through 12th grade, it's tough, but it's very important. And today I'm competing like, well, not now because of COVID, but right now, if I was competing, I would be practicing for tennis. Then I would run. And of course, I'm older now, so I have that time. But when you have other things to do, I still have to be on the computer. I still have to do meetings such as this. I have executive committee meeting. I have board meetings. I serve on the board of directors for Special Olympics Incorporated. Some people would say Special Olympics International because Special Olympics it governs over 6 million athletes now in almost 200 countries. And we're in the schools, we're doing unified school projects. So I have to basically manage my time. Every morning I get up, I knew this call was a day. I had a call this morning. Tomorrow I have 3 calls. So I had to manage my time out.
Yeah, absolutely a life skill. So thank you for sharing that. Our
Yes.
next question comes from Mahi Dobson and asks, what was the hardest challenge for you to overcome during your life?
The hardest challenge, a lot of people think the hardest challenge for me to overcome was being Black. And that was a challenge, but I didn't see that as a much challenge until the 60s when we hit the riots. Because my mother always brought us up, the people that you meet outside, we're all one people, we're all God's children. I know we don't like to talk about religion, but that's the rule that you followed. I don't care who so-and-so is out there. If they call you a name, then you deal with it. But I don't want to hear you call them a name because they come from a country or they believe in something else. My mother never tolerated that at home. And a lot of times, things like that, it starts at home before the child even gets to school. So we had basically a sound base. Did I run into problems being an African American? I remember when I was little and I would go to the store and the man would say, oh, you get the candy over here. I said, why can't I get that candy? And I would argue with the man. because my nickel was just as good as the next kid's nickel. Money has no color but green or silver or, of course, copper with pennies a day. But coming up, being a woman in the martial arts became a challenge for me. Being a person with intellectual disability was a double challenge for me, even in school. When I wanted to help start the track team at York High, I remember students come to me, oh, let's go to Loretta. She's a flunky, she would do it, and I fell for it. And I went out and I went to the principal. I said, Mr. Eckenroe, can we have a girls track team? No, but you can run in the hall. And I just was the scapegoat. I don't know what young people would call it today. We were always called the person who falls for everything. And I fell for it. And the students, once we got a track team and we were able to track at the track down in the city, we called it the medal field. The boys couldn't be there. We got very limited time and I pushed and pushed and pushed. I never even noticed it, but I was pushing for the right. The girls have the same opportunities as the guys to run track. And then they came out with the first track team a year later after I graduated from high school. My biggest challenge was when I got told by those other girls and that team that I helped form, that I worked towards, we don't want no retards here. I was annoyed, but I didn't let it stop me. And neither did my teacher. I remember the teacher, the coach, Mrs. Kasiva, she had a Russian dialect, and she said, turned around to the girls, Loretta belongs on this team just as much as every one of you. And if anything more, it was her that was persistent to go to the principal. It was her that was persistent to get everything signed. I'm your teacher, I'm your coach, and I'm going to tell you now, things are going to be like this. That was a challenge, but it didn't stop me. It was a challenge for me to be a woman and to be in the martial arts. I have a 4th degree black belt. I got shunned so many times by the guys, but I held my own. I couldn't come home and say, well, I'm quitting, because I had to pay money to take those lessons, and money didn't come from my mommy. I had to get out there and hustle and clean houses and babysit to get that money.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you. So Chase Henderson, 6th grader, wants to know, what are you most proud of doing? And it doesn't have to be related to Special Olympics. It can be anything that you wanted to share.
I'm most proud of doing when I go out and I work with young people. I know the Chris Pasadik Center, they had a mental and physical toughness in their charter school. And they came to me and says, Loretta, we'd like you to teach physical toughness. Well, I'm most proud when I'm around young people and I can talk to them and let them learn the history that I had come up, the good history and the bad history, but also that history, the bad history is not repeated.
Yeah.
So they learn about the bad history. Let's take, for instance, using the word retarded. That's how they define people like me. Today, we don't use those words. But we also teach in the history of it that that's a negative word to use, why it was used. It was a medical term when it first started out. It was a good term, mental retardation, a person with. So today we don't use those words. We use people with intellectual disability or developmental disability, the words that we use today. And who knows if for say, I like to one day see that we use people as Loretta, who's walking down the street, who went to school with me, or Loretta, who's my neighbor. And until we learn about our history, the negative part of the history will never have a positive part. So we don't want that to reflect that. Now you know why those words aren't used, why we look at people as people, not as people of a certain religion or where they come from or the color of their skin. Until we learn the bad history, we don't want to repeat that. So yes, that is part of learning about history, but we want to go forward and repeat good history, that we are all people.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. Our next question is from Bryn Johnston. She's a 7th grader. And she asks, being a Black woman, have you faced any racism or sexism, and how did you overcome it?
Oh, she asked the right one.
Yeah, that's a good question, yeah.
The one with sexism, it was always a fight for me. For being an African-American woman, I used to fight. And you got to understand, I came up in a time where things were tough. I came up in the 60s. I saw the riots, and I don't want that repeated. I would hear my mother talk. She went to an all-black school. Why did you go to an all-black school? She said, because that's the way things were then. And she would tell me stories. Well, when I went to school, our schools, everyone went. And there were some issues, but it never really played role in the high school. But I can remember there were instances on jobs where, oh, we don't, want you, or it wasn't usually the employer, it would be somebody else. I worked at one job and the guy had a habit of thought, I like, and he would describe something about my hair. And I said to him one day, I went to the boss, I said, I don't like what he's saying about me. And I do not appreciate him smacking me on my backside. That is inappropriate. Well, I lost my job because I stood up. But you know what? That wasn't the only job. And I had an old uncle who says, where God closes one door, he opens another with brighter light. So I got another job, and then I lost that. But I was not afraid to step up. And I always look for that brighter light. And sometimes we give up too easily as women, as people with different backgrounds, with different religions. Sometimes you have to just plant your feet and stand up. Nowadays, if I have an issue with somebody, I just go like this, whip it off, it's done, it's over, I'm done with you. I used to use my fists to fight. That's not going to get me anywhere. Probably behind bars.
Yeah.
And I just like to show people, oh, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could do that. And I just try to deal with it in a different way. Instead of sitting here arguing with them, showing all my stature, my ammunition, I just show them nicely. Today I use humor. Yeah. I remember one time as a youth, we had a girl who was a white family, and she would always call me names. Well, she knew I was going to throw a stone or a stick at her. And then her mother called my mom, and of course my mom didn't condone fighting. She says, Loretta, next time you walk past her, well, I couldn't get away from walking past her house to go to the store. So one day she was sitting out in the sun with a bathing suit on. I said, I don't have to sit in the sun with a bathing suit on. You're just trying to be like me. And walked away. I had no more problem out of that girl.
Yeah. Great example. Thank you.
Sometimes you just have to use humor, and humor goes a long way.
Good. So our next question is from Noah Coldiron. He's a sixth grader. And what was it like to have 7 siblings? You seem so positive all the time. How do you do that?
Oh, how about my mom would have had 9 if the other 2 would have lived, but she had 7 and we adopted one. So it was at times, of course, most of the siblings, the older ones were, my brother went to the service, my other brother worked, and he was on his own. But you learn to make do, and I think it's good to be in a family with lots of siblings than just with just yourself, because you can have company. And yeah, it's a chore. It's much harder. You don't have the resources because there's 7 of you. You might have to share things, but that's a learning experience. Mm-hmm. And I think when you have 7, we learned how to compromise. And for those who don't know what compromise is, if you have 1 pair of skates, you learned how to, and your other 2 sisters won, and you got to share those skates. You're not going to wait your turn to skate on 2 turns on those skates. So you skated on 1 skate and your sister skated on another, and you hope that they got tired. And then there was time that you got to use both the skates yourself, because my mother couldn't afford to go out and buy 5 pairs of skates for 5 girls. Yeah. You learned how to compromise. And I think having a big family, it just is a whole different outlook. You learn how to use your resources, and you learn from each other.
Such a great word, compromise, and a skill that I think we want to continue to foster. So thank you. Our next question comes from Gabrielle Abdil, an 8th grade student who wants to know, did you ever think your story would impact so many people, or were you unaware of how extraordinary it was at the time?
At the time, I thought, there was no way that I was going to be successful. I'm not what you call, it depends on what you say successful, but successful to me is not big things, not a big house, not a big car, but successful is feel good in your heart. You know, the goodness of your heart. Are people going to really accept me? To me, successful is acceptance into my community. So I never thought that I would be successful, but obviously my mother did. And, you know, with my running, I thought it was always people would look at me and say, look at that crazy girl running. But who would ever thought that I would, you know, do a marathon? I didn't even know what a marathon was. And then I found out as a kid, a marathon is 26 miles. There's no way I'm going to do that. But I was determined. I was all self-trained. I had a friend named Mr. Hollis who ran with me. We're still best friends today, him and his wife and I. And he got in and says, I think I'm going to try a marathon. I looked at him, yeah, right. That's 26 miles. So we trained together. He did the first one, and 25 marathons later, I did 26 marathons, but I was determined. And there was nobody saying, I'm training Loretta or this and that. It was just self-determination. And the people of Derby, I had the chance to go to the Middle East, and I was really thrilled. In 2019, I went to the Middle East twice, and I went to the Middle East in 2018. And they actually have a term for people with intellectual disability over there. They call their people of determination. And I was of determination way ahead of my time.
Yeah. Wow, extraordinary. Thank you. Our next question comes from 8th grade student Turner Hare and wonders, where did you get the motivation to train for the Special Olympics?
That's a tough one because I think I got the motivation between my mother and my brother and people along the way. I was self-trained. I didn't have a coach who trained me every week. There wasn't really good sneakers for running. Martial arts, I was kind of shunned because I was a female. But I just had that drive in me. And I think that drive came from my mother.
Great, thanks. So our next question kind of bounces us back up to the high school with junior Rachel Coldiron wants to know, if you could give your 10-year-old self a piece of advice, what would it be?
If I give my 10-year-old self a piece of advice, number one, it wouldn't be to change my life. But number two, if I could give my 10-year-old self to have advice, my advice would be to treat everyone like I would want to be treated, like I would want to be treated. I would want to be treated with respect. I would want to be included in school, because at that 10-year-old, it's hard when you go to school and people don't want you in their classrooms because you're slower, or you learn slower, or you look different, or you come from a different background. So I would say I would like to be included in everything.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question comes from Jonathan Hoinaki. He's a junior, and he's wondering, how did you win the 1996 Arthur Ashe Award? More specifically, how did you find the courage to face the adversity to the point that it was nationally recognized?
You know, I don't know how I faced the adversity, but it's through the strength and the perseverance of a school teacher named Miss Janice Reaver, who just passed away right before New Year's Day. She was my elementary teacher at Ferguson School. She was a special education teacher, and she wanted her children to learn. And of course, our classes were put away from the other classes, but she would always say to us, you can learn. It won't be that you'll be the scholar or the big book reader or the big student to do big things, but you can learn. And that teacher always says, Loretta, you do count. And my mother always says, Loretta, you do count and you can learn. And it was the motivation from that teacher, my mother, a coach, people I met along the way, Miss Janet McFarland. I thought I could never speak. And then one day she says, I'd like you to speak out of school. And I look at her and I said, I don't speak. And she says, well, how do you know if you speak if you don't give it a try? And now I go all over the world speaking. Now, because of COVID, I can't go out. but I can do it the same as I'm doing today. And I hope one day I'll be able to be at your school or one of your schools to speak to young people.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. So, Ms. Claiborne, before we let you go, I do have one final question. Inevitably, everyone faces hardships. Do you have any words of wisdoms for how you approach and overcome an obstacle that may be preventing you from achieving that goal?
But right now, yes, look at COVID-19. It's preventing us all. It's preventing these young people from being in school. I felt bad for the young people who couldn't graduate physically, because that's an honor to work 12 years of your life. But I turn around and take that sour grape and make it into a sweet grape by just holding my head up and pushing through. I hear people say, I'm just so depressed with COVID. Well, I took myself with COVID the first time when I found out I couldn't do Special Olympics. I was really upset because I was going to go to state games to do my figure skating, and I was looking to so many things. And yes, it popped my bubble, but I said, this is not going to stop me. I like to knit, and I started knitting preemie hats for York Hospital, knitting preemie hats for a hospital in North Dakota. I never saw none of these babies. I knit hundreds of hats for babies at McGee Women's Hospital. I made knockers for women who have breast cancer. It's an insert that fits in her garment. I did all these volunteer things, and I'm never going to let that stop me. I can go out and run. People say, well, I can't do nothing. I'm just in the house. I said, yes, you can go out and run. There's good air out there. You're not going to catch COVID from that air. So basically, I try to turn and look for the good things, even though things are bothering me. Is COVID bothering me? Yes, but it's bothering the rest of the world. If you're a kid, 3 or 4 years old, and you can talk and say, Mommy, I want to go out and play on the playground equipment, and the playground's closed, it's affecting you. So I try to look and find some good out of all the bad. Am I going to get rid of the bad? Possibly not. But I try to turn things away and turn things around and compromise for the good things that I can find out of it instead of the bad things, including making this ugly mask.
Well, as I said in the beginning before we started, how much I appreciated you sharing your masks. And let me just kind of close up by saying, Ms. Claiborne, we greatly appreciate you sharing your expertise and your knowledge and your lessons, and kind of recircling back to that about perseverance and determination and resilience as our young adults and as they outreach toward their future. It's extremely helpful. So from myself, all of the teachers and all the students, we extend a huge thank you. We appreciate you spending time with us today. Wish you well in these endeavors that you're doing via COVID that you can't get out. And we too hope that when we get kind of post-COVID that we can get you out to visit some students and engage in a different kind of atmosphere. But with that, we certainly appreciate you joining us in a virtual world today.
Well, thank you. And I wish all the students good blessings on how they deal with COVID, and that one day we will be back in school and enjoying each other and having laughter and good times.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.